The year of open contact is not a future event. It is the moment when humanity becomes a vibrational match for what has always been here. You are starting to notice a pattern in how certain events line up, and it quietly changes how you look at what you call coincidence. For a long time, strange things in the sky were treated as isolated moments. A light here, a shape there, a story that fades after a few days. But something about the cluster of sightings reported around January 11th felt different. Not louder, not more dramatic, just more coordinated, more evenly spread, more calmly visible, as if the event itself was not trying to shock, but to be noticed by those already paying attention. This video is about that pattern, not about proving anything, and not about convincing anyone of what to believe. It is about exploring a different way of understanding why certain things appear when they do, and what that timing might be reflecting in human awareness right now. The perspective we'll explore doesn't rely on fear, invasion stories, or dramatic predictions. It looks instead at how reality mirrors internal states, and how collective perception begins to shift before outer confirmation ever becomes clear. Most people hear about unusual sightings and immediately ask, are they real? Or what are they? But there is another question that is often more revealing. Why now? Not in a sensational way, in a subtle one. Why does a theme rise into collective awareness at a specific moment, across many places, without a single organizing center? To understand that, we need to talk about how consciousness and reality interact, not as an abstract idea, but as a lived process that is already happening. At a very basic level, the model we're exploring here says that consciousness is not a byproduct of reality. It is the field from which reality is experienced. What you call the physical world is a reflection, a feedback surface, shaped by states of awareness, not by wishful thinking, not by belief alone, by alignment between perception and the version of reality that matches it. From that view, nothing that appears in a collective way is random, not because it is planned by some external authority, but because it resonates with where the collective mind is beginning to tune. This does not mean everyone is on the same wavelength, far from it. It means that a certain frequency becomes available, and some people start picking it up before others even know the signal exists. When reports of unusual objects appear almost simultaneously across different countries, different cultures, different levels of media attention, the question is not just about technology or origin. It is about synchronization. It is about what kind of conversation reality itself is trying to start, gently, without forcing. Here is a simple reframe that can help orient what follows. Instead of asking whether something is being revealed to humanity, consider whether humanity is becoming able to notice something that was always there. This is an important shift. It removes the drama of arrival and replaces it with the idea of perceptual readiness. And this is where the idea of timing becomes essential. In this perspective, reality does not operate on a single fixed timeline. There are parallel versions of events, parallel versions of history, and parallel versions of you all coexisting. What you experience as now is the version you are aligned with, based on your state of being, your expectations, your definitions of what is possible, and your emotional frequency. Collectively, the same principle applies. A civilization does not move forward in a straight line. It shifts from one version of itself to another, often gradually, sometimes suddenly, depending on how much coherence builds in a certain direction. So when a theme like non-human intelligence, advanced craft, or unexplained aerial phenomena starts to appear more openly, the deeper question is not what is entering our world, but which version of our world we are beginning to step into. Pause for a moment and notice this, not as a conclusion, but as a way of framing the rest of the exploration. If reality reflects state, then what kind of state would naturally produce a gentle increase in visible anomalies, without immediate clarity, without official closure, and without universal agreement? It would be a state of transition, not panic, not full contact, not denial either. A threshold state, a place where old assumptions start to loosen, but new ones are not yet fully formed. This is often uncomfortable for the mind, because the mind prefers clear categories, known or unknown, true or false, real or fake. But transitional phases are by nature ambiguous. They stretch perception, They introduce data that doesn't fit neatly into existing boxes. This is one reason why many people respond to sightings with either immediate belief or immediate dismissal. Both are attempts to regain certainty. The middle space, where something is acknowledged without being fully defined, is harder to stay in. Yet that middle space is where shifts in collective awareness actually happen. Now let's gently connect this to the idea that the years leading up to a certain point, often referenced as a time of change, are not about external events suddenly breaking into reality. They are about the internal readiness of humanity to interact with a broader context of existence. From this view, what is sometimes called disclosure is not a single announcement or reveal. It is a gradual change in what can be perceived without destabilizing the collective psyche. Think of how children learn. You don't tell a 5-year-old everything about adulthood in one conversation. You introduce concepts when their nervous system and cognitive structure can hold them. In a similar way, a civilization's contact with a larger cosmic environment unfolds in stages, each one matching the level of emotional and psychological integration available. So when you hear about a cluster of sightings, rather than jumping to conclusions about visitors or threats, consider this alternative. These are mirrors. They are reflections of a version of humanity that is beginning to include not alone as a normal assumption, rather than a shocking possibility. This does not require blind belief. It only requires noticing how the collective story is slowly changing. Another important piece of this perspective is the idea that forgetting is intentional. In this model, consciousness chooses to experience itself through limitation, through apparent separation, through not knowing the full structure of reality. This forgetting allows for genuine exploration, genuine choice, and genuine self-discovery. From that standpoint, encounters with the unknown are not intrusions. They are reminders. Not reminders of danger, but reminders of a larger identity that has been temporarily set aside. Now, a brief orientation before we go deeper. What we are exploring is not about predicting dates or guaranteeing events. It is about understanding how shifts in awareness create new probabilities. Some of those probabilities are experienced as sightings, some as technological breakthroughs, some as changes in social conversation. All are part of the same underlying movement. And here is a subtle but important point. The idea that nothing is random does not mean everything is controlled. It means everything is meaningful in relation to state. A reflection is not a command, it is a response. So when something unusual appears, the question becomes, what state is it responding to? Around the early 2020s, humanity began to openly question its long-held assumptions about its place in the universe, not in fringe groups only, but in mainstream science, government discussions, and popular culture. This did not come from nowhere. It followed decades of gradual expansion in what was considered plausible. The January 11th sightings, viewed through this lens, are not isolated sparks. They are small flashes along a growing edge of awareness. Here is a gentle cognitive reset. You don't need to decide what these objects were to understand what they might represent. Representation comes before explanation. When a symbol appears repeatedly in dreams, you don't first ask whether the symbol is physically real. You ask what part of you is ready to communicate through it. On a collective level, recurring themes in the sky can be seen in a similar way. They are symbols in shared experience, pointing to an expansion of context. This does not reduce them to imagination. It simply places their significance at the level of meaning rather than mechanics. Let's now bring in another key idea: alignment over effort. In this framework, change does not occur because a society strains, pushes, or forces itself into a new stage. It occurs because its internal definitions shift enough that a new version of reality becomes the closest match. The transition can feel like discovery, but it is actually selection. Not selection by an external judge, but by resonance. You are always experiencing the version of reality that best matches your current state. Collectively, the same is true. When enough individuals begin to hold a compatible state, a new collective experience becomes statistically dominant. This is why preparation, in this sense, is not about building defenses or technologies. It is about emotional maturity, conceptual flexibility, and the ability to hold the unknown without collapsing into fear or fantasy. Now consider how the topic of non-human intelligence has been framed historically. For much of the last century, it was either ridiculed or sensationalized. Both extremes kept it at a distance from calm, grounded consideration. Recently, however, a third tone has begun to emerge: neutral, curious, analytical, not dismissive, not hysterical. That tonal shift is more important than any single report, because tone reflects state. A calm question invites a different kind of answer than a panicked one. This is part of what the model suggests when it speaks of parallel versions of Earth. In one version, contact narratives are dominated by fear and control. In another, by curiosity and cooperation. Which version becomes more vivid depends on which emotional frequency becomes more common. The sightings themselves do not force the outcome. They simply appear in the context that is ready to interpret them in a certain way. The pattern we're describing here about timing and readiness will connect later to why certain years are often mentioned as thresholds rather than endpoints. For now, just let that sit as a background note. Returning to the present, it is worth noticing that many of the January 11th reports described objects that did not behave like conventional aircraft, yet also did not display overtly impossible maneuvers. They occupied a middle category, unusual enough to question, subtle enough to remain ambiguous. Ambiguity is not a flaw in this process, it is a feature. Clear, undeniable contact would overwhelm a collective that is still integrating the idea of not being the only intelligence. Complete invisibility would stall the transition. Ambiguous visibility allows the conversation to unfold gradually at multiple levels of belief without forcing uniform interpretation. This is very similar to how personal insight works. A realization rarely arrives as a thunderbolt that rewrites your entire identity in 1 second. It often comes as a series of small recognitions, each one slightly expanding your sense of what is possible, until one day you realize your perspective has quietly shifted. Collective awakening, in this sense, is not a dramatic event. It is an accumulation of subtle redefinitions, another cognitive reset to keep orientation clear. We are not talking about proving extraterrestrial presence. We are talking about understanding how consciousness-based models interpret the appearance of anomalies as reflections of readiness rather than invasions. This distinction matters because it removes the narrative of threat and replaces it with the narrative of resonance. Now let's look at the idea of suffering as misalignment rather than punishment. This may seem unrelated, but it is actually central. In this framework, discomfort arises when there is a mismatch between one's state and the reality one is experiencing, not as a moral judgment, but as a signal. When applied collectively, periods of confusion, polarization, and anxiety can be seen as indicators that old definitions are no longer aligned with emerging possibilities. The increase in discussions about non-human intelligence happens in the context of a world already questioning its economic, social, and ecological models. The old stories are losing coherence, new ones are not fully formed. This creates a fertile ground for broader identity questions, including the most fundamental one: who are we in the universe? From a consciousness-first view, this is not coincidence, it is convergence. And convergence tends to produce symbolic events, not necessarily orchestrated but synchronistic, events that echo an internal shift by appearing as external prompts. The sky, in this sense, becomes a screen on which the collective psyche projects its readiness to expand its self-image. Another key concept is intentional forgetting. If consciousness chooses to experience itself as separate and limited, then rediscovering a larger context will naturally feel like remembering something rather than learning something new. This can create a strange familiarity when encountering the idea of other intelligences. A sense of, this makes sense even before details are known. Many people report that when they first seriously consider the possibility of advanced non-human civilizations, their reaction is not shock, but recognition, not certainty, but resonance. This is consistent with the idea that awareness is realigning with a broader identity at once set aside. Again, this does not require belief in any specific story. It only requires noticing the emotional tone of the response. Now about the year that is often referenced as a turning point. In this model, such a year is not a deadline, it is a convergence zone, a region of probability where multiple trajectories intersect. Think of it like this. If you are driving toward a city, there is not a single point where you suddenly arrive conceptually. There are suburbs, signs, changes in traffic patterns, shifts in landscape. By the time you cross the city limit sign, you have already been in the transition for a while. Similarly, a collective shift toward open interaction with non-human intelligence would not begin on the day of official contact. It would be preceded by years of perceptual softening, normalization, and incremental exposure. The current decade can be seen as that approach phase. This is why the question "why now" is more useful than "what is it?" Because "why now" points to state, and state is what determines which parallel version of reality becomes most prominent. Let's take a moment for another gentle reorientation. Nothing in this perspective asks you to suspend critical thinking. It simply invites you to consider that causation may not be limited to physical chains of events, but may include resonance between inner and outer conditions. With that in mind, the January 11th cluster can be viewed as a resonance marker, a small wave on the surface of a much larger shift, not a message in itself, but a reflection of a question becoming stable in the collective mind. The question is not, "Are we alone?" The question is, "Are we ready to no longer define ourselves as alone?" Readiness here does not mean agreement. It means capacity. Capacity to hold complexity. Capacity to tolerate uncertainty. Capacity to imagine a universe that is not centered solely on human narratives. These capacities develop over time, through culture, science, and inner exploration. They cannot be forced. They emerge. Another important idea is that reality is not something that happens to consciousness. It is something consciousness participates in selecting. This is what is meant by parallel versions of self and world. At every moment, you are aligning with one slice of a larger set of possibilities. When a society becomes more coherent around a certain expectation, even loosely, it begins to experience the version of reality that matches that expectation. Expectation here does not mean wish. It means definition. What is considered possible, what is considered plausible, what is emotionally tolerable. As the definition of possible life beyond Earth shifts from fantasy to probability, the matching version of reality becomes more accessible. This does not create the phenomenon. It aligns with it. There is a subtle but profound difference. Now, let's connect this to the idea of quiet, individual awakening. Large shifts are built from countless small ones. A person questions an assumption. Another person becomes less reactive to the unknown. Another allows themselves to hold curiosity without needing immediate answers. These micro shifts accumulate. At a certain point, they form a stable pattern, and reality, as a mirror, begins to show that pattern back. The sky becomes a canvas for that reflection, because the sky has always represented the unknown, the beyond, the larger context. So when unusual lights appear, they are not just physical anomalies. They are symbols in the shared imagination, pointing to a widening of identity. This does not require mysticism. It requires understanding that meaning and matter are not separate domains. They are two sides of the same experiential coin. Here is another cognitive reset, phrased differently. You can think of these sightings not as messages from elsewhere, but as punctuation marks in an ongoing sentence that humanity is writing about itself. The sentence is, "We are part of a larger community of consciousness." The punctuation is still subtle. Commas, not periods, and commas invite continuation. As we move further into this exploration, we will look at how the idea of a future threshold year fits into this pattern, not as a promise, but as a convergence of readiness, probability, and collective self-definition. For now, it is enough to see that the events themselves, when viewed through a consciousness-first lens, are less about objects and more about orientation. They ask quietly, without demand, what kind of universe do you believe you live in, and how does that belief shape what you are able to notice? That question does not need an immediate answer. It unfolds over time as perception refines and emotional tone stabilizes. And in that unfolding, small, ambiguous, non-random moments begin to appear. As this idea of readiness continues to unfold, it helps to look at how perception itself works. You never experience reality directly. You experience your interpretation of it, filtered through expectations, emotional tone, and what you assume is possible. Two people can look at the same sky and see entirely different worlds. One sees empty space with lights that must have simple explanations. Another feels a quiet sense of context, as if the universe is more populated than previously assumed. Neither reaction is forced. Each is a match to an internal state. From this view, what appears in the world is not trying to convince anyone. It is simply available to be noticed by those whose perception has already begun to include it. This is why attempts to prove extraordinary things often create more resistance than openness. Proof belongs to a mindset that still seeks certainty through control. Recognition belongs to a mindset that allows reality to reveal itself gradually, in ways that feel natural rather than imposed. Consider how your own awareness has changed over time. There were ideas you once rejected automatically that you can now hold with curiosity. There were questions that once felt threatening that now feel interesting. This shift did not happen because someone forced information on you. It happened because your internal definitions evolved. When definitions change, the range of what can be perceived without tension expands. On a collective level, this expansion is slow but cumulative. It does not require agreement. It only requires enough individuals to soften their boundaries around what they consider possible. When that happens, reality begins to offer matching experiences, not dramatic enough to shatter stability, but clear enough to invite rethinking. Another way to frame this is through the idea of parallel selves. At every moment, there are versions of you who are more open, more skeptical, more fearful, more trusting. You align with one of these versions based on your current state. The same applies to civilizations. There are parallel versions of Earth where contact is open, where it is hidden, where it is feared, where it is ignored. Which version feels real depends on the dominant emotional and conceptual frequency. So when clusters of unusual observations occur, they can be seen as glimpses of a version of Earth where the boundary between us and others is becoming more permeable. Not because a wall is being broken, but because the idea of a wall is losing its necessity. This is where the notion of alignment over effort becomes important again. You do not force yourself into a new version of reality. You relax into it by letting go of definitions that no longer fit. The more a society releases the need to be the sole focus of intelligence in the universe, the more naturally it will experience itself as part of a larger field of life. This does not mean everything becomes clear or comfortable overnight. Transitional phases are often marked by uncertainty. Old stories no longer fully explain what is happening, and new stories are still forming. In that gap, symbols appear. The sky, vast and historically associated with mystery, becomes one of the most powerful places for such symbols to show themselves. There is also the question of why these appearances tend to be subtle rather than overwhelming. From a consciousness-first perspective, overwhelming experiences would generate defensive reactions that reinforce separation. Subtle experiences, on the other hand, allow the mind to stay open. They invite inquiry instead of demanding belief. They support a gradual reorientation rather than a shock. Think of how trust develops between individuals. It is built through consistent, gentle signals, not sudden confrontations. On a planetary scale, the same principle can apply. A larger context of intelligence would not need to announce itself with force. It would only need to become visible enough for those who are ready to notice, allowing the rest to remain undisturbed until their own readiness grows. This leads to an important reframe of what contact means. Instead of imagining a single dramatic encounter, it can be understood as a spectrum of interactions, many of which occur at the level of perception and interpretation long before any physical meeting is acknowledged. The first contact is not with beings, but with the idea that reality is more populated and more interconnected than previously assumed. Another gentle reorientation. You are not being prepared for an event. You are participating in a shift of context. Events are simply the surface expression of that shift. As the context broadens, questions that once seemed speculative begin to feel relevant. Not urgent, not alarming, just relevant. This is how normalization begins. What was once extraordinary becomes discussable. What was once taboo becomes neutral. What was once unthinkable becomes a quiet possibility. The mention of a future convergence point, a period when these themes become more openly integrated, fits into this pattern. Such a point is not a finish line. It is a region of increased coherence, where enough individual shifts overlap that a new collective story stabilizes. The years leading up to it are not about waiting, but about adjusting perception so that the new story can be lived without fear. In this light, sightings and reports are not signals of impending disruption. They are indicators of changing self-definition. Humanity is slowly including itself in a larger narrative, one where intelligence is not confined to a single planet or a single form. There is also a quieter dimension to this process. Each person who allows the idea of a populated universe without anxiety contributes to the overall tone. Each moment of calm curiosity adds a small coherence to the field. You do not need to know what is in the sky to participate in this. You only need to notice how your own relationship with the unknown is evolving. Another cognitive reset, offered gently. The unknown is not an enemy of understanding. It is the space in which understanding grows. As definitions loosen, the sense of separation that once felt absolute begins to soften. The line between here and out there becomes more conceptual than emotional, and when that happens, experiences that reflect connection rather than isolation become more likely to appear. This is why the idea of suffering as misalignment matters here too. Much of collective anxiety comes from holding on to identities that are too small for the reality they are beginning to encounter. When identity expands, tension decreases. The world does not suddenly become simple, but it becomes more coherent. The appearance of unexplained phenomena can then be seen not as a threat to stability, but as an invitation to grow into a larger sense of self. Not a command, not a test, simply an opportunity for redefinition. At this stage, nothing needs to be concluded. The process is ongoing, the patterns are still forming, the questions are becoming clearer, even as the answers remain open. What matters most is the shift in how those questions are held. And in that shift, small, quiet, non-random signs continue to appear, not to prove anything, but to reflect what is slowly becoming possible to perceive. As this broader context continues to unfold, it becomes easier to see that the real movement is not happening in the sky, but in the way the human mind is learning to relate to what it does not yet fully understand. The sky only reflects that learning. It mirrors the stage of openness that is becoming stable enough to hold new kinds of questions without collapsing into fear or denial. One of the most important shifts taking place is the movement from belief to perception. Belief is something you defend. Perception is something you experience. When a topic moves from the category of belief into the category of perception, it no longer needs constant argument. It becomes part of the background of how reality is interpreted. This is what slowly happens when a civilization becomes ready to include itself in a larger field of intelligence. At first, the idea exists as speculation, then as possibility, then as probability, and eventually as context. The difference between these stages is not the amount of evidence, but the emotional tone with which the idea is held. Fear keeps it at the level of threat. Fantasy keeps it at the level of escape. Calm curiosity allows it to become a normal part of the map of reality. This is why the calmness of many recent discussions matters more than their conclusions. A calm discussion means the nervous system is no longer treating the unknown as something that must be immediately rejected or controlled. It means there is room for complexity, for ambiguity, for gradual understanding, and where there is room, new perceptions can settle. In a consciousness-based model, nothing truly new enters experience until the perceiver has a place for it. You do not notice what you have no category for, or if you do, you quickly dismiss it. Categories are not intellectual only, they are emotional. They are made of what feels safe, what feels coherent, what fits into a stable sense of identity. When identity expands, categories expand, and when categories expand, the range of what can be noticed expands with them. This is why the idea of parallel versions of self is so relevant. You are not becoming a different person in the future. You are aligning with a version of yourself that already exists in a broader context of awareness. The same applies collectively. A version of humanity that is comfortable with the presence of other intelligences already exists as a potential. The current shift is about tuning into that version. From this angle, the year often referenced as a turning point is not a moment when something suddenly arrives. It is a point where the overlap between internal readiness and external probability becomes strong enough that a new normal stabilizes. The path toward that point is made of countless small adjustments in perception, tone, and self-definition. These adjustments are rarely dramatic. They are quiet. They show up as changes in what conversations feel possible, what questions feel natural, what assumptions no longer feel solid. They show up as a subtle relaxation around the idea that humanity is part of a much larger story. Another gentle reorientation. Nothing is being taken away by this expansion. No identity is being erased. The sense of being human is not diminished by the inclusion of a larger context. It is enriched. Just as knowing that Earth is not the center of the solar system did not make human life meaningless, knowing that humanity is not the only form of intelligence does not reduce its value. It places it in relationship. Relationship, in this framework, is the key word. Not hierarchy, not invasion, not salvation. Relationship. A recognition of shared existence within a field of consciousness that expresses itself in many forms. This also connects to the idea of intentional forgetting. If consciousness explores itself by focusing into particular perspectives, then the rediscovery of a broader context will always feel like remembering rather than learning. It will carry a sense of familiarity, even if the details are new. This is why the idea of other intelligences can feel strangely obvious once it is allowed, as if it fits into a larger pattern that was always there but temporarily set aside. The role of sightings, reports, and anomalies, then, is not to shock, but to gently reintroduce that larger pattern into awareness. They act as prompts, not proofs. They stir curiosity, not certainty, and curiosity is the doorway through which new definitions can enter without resistance. The way these perceptions are integrating now is directly related to how a future sense of open interaction will feel natural rather than disruptive. There is also an important emotional component to consider. A civilization that is still deeply organized around competition and fear will interpret the unknown through those lenses. A civilization that is learning cooperation and self-reflection will interpret the unknown very differently. The same stimulus can produce radically different meanings depending on the underlying state. This is why the internal work of individuals matters, even when the topic seems cosmic. Each person who resolves a bit of fear, who becomes more comfortable with uncertainty, who learns to observe without immediately judging, contributes to the collective tone. And collective tone shapes which version of reality becomes most accessible. Another cognitive reset, phrased in a new way. Reality does not respond to what you demand, but to what you are ready to recognize. Readiness is not about knowledge. It is about coherence. It is the ability to hold a larger context without fragmentation. When coherence increases, the field of experience can reflect more complex patterns. This is also where the idea of suffering as misalignment returns. Much of the tension in the world today comes from the gap between old identities and emerging possibilities. The old identity says, we are alone, struggling, separate, competing. The emerging context suggests we are part of a vast interconnected field of consciousness, learning to recognize itself. The friction between these views creates uncertainty, anxiety, and polarization. But friction is not failure. It is a sign of transition. As the transition continues, experiences that hint at a larger context become more visible, not because they are being sent as lessons, but because the collective state can finally register them without immediate distortion. The idea of alignment over effort applies here in a very practical way. Trying to force understanding of the unknown often leads to rigid narratives and defensive reactions. Allowing understanding to unfold through curiosity and emotional stability leads to organic integration. One creates tension, the other creates resonance. Resonance is quiet. It does not announce itself. It simply feels right, even when it is unfamiliar. This is why the end of this exploration does not aim for a conclusion. Conclusions close loops. The process we are touching on is still opening. It is not about arriving at a final answer, but about stabilizing a new way of asking. You might notice as time goes on that your relationship with the idea of a larger universe becomes less charged, less dramatic, more matter of fact. That is a sign of integration. When something truly becomes part of your world, it stops being a spectacle and starts being context. Context does not demand attention. It quietly shapes everything else. So when you look back at moments like the cluster of sightings, you may not see them as isolated mysteries. You may see them as early expressions of a shift that was already underway in consciousness. not the cause of the change, but one of its reflections. And as that shift continues, the most significant changes may not be in what appears in the sky, but in what becomes possible to think, to feel, and to recognize about your place in the whole. There is no final statement needed here, no prediction to lock in, no outcome to guarantee, only an ongoing adjustment of perception, a gradual widening of identity, and a quiet sense that the story you are part of is larger than the one you were taught to expect. The sky, the reports, the questions, the future convergence points, all of them are threads in that story. They do not complete it. They invite you to notice how it is already unfolding, one shift in awareness at a time. And in that noticing, without pressure, without demand, a broader sense of reality continues to become gently, steadily available.